Hey everyone, Joseph here. Come check out my blog at blog on all things healthcare related, bacteria related, or whatever I feel like writing. Cool. So today is day 8 of my MCAT study session, and I wanted to talk about something that I hold near and dear to my heart, and that is whether the question, does institutional discrimination still exist? Um, I wanted to address whether or not that can be answered. And my answer, my personal opinion, is that institutional discrimination in healthcare has persisted and is still actively going on right now. So essentially, let me key you into how I felt about or how I got into the subject. I was reading an article here on racial biases, and it was by this man, Dr. Ron Wyatt, and he's a 61-year-old African American man. And this was anecdotal, but I'll share some examples, some statistics later. So he went into the ER as not as a doctor, but as a patient, and he was running a fever because he went to go on a missions trip and was helping, I believe, some orphans. Yeah, I know that's a little bit cheesy, but then he went into the ER and he took Tylenol's fever. He was at like a 103, and then he was there with his wife. He goes in, and essentially the nurses, they just deliver substandard care to him. So he goes in, he asks, so the first thing that they do is they take him to his room, after a little bit of a wait, and then essentially he looked at the patient records, and because he's a doctor, like he knows the ins and outs of the medical system, right? He sees a name on record. And he's like, "Ma'am, that's not my name." He turns to the nurse and says, "Ma'am, the name on the chart isn't me." And then essentially she's like, "No, no, no, you can't be right. Of course this is the right one that you have here." And he's like, "Ma'am, no, it's not." So keep in mind that in the back of his head, he was thinking, he was weighing the options. Like maybe they were just delivering substandard care for that day. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they were stressed out. Um, the thought of institutional discrimination did come into his head, but it was these repeated microaggressions that essentially keyed him into the fact that if he were possibly white or Caucasian, he might not have had to face these problems. So his wife is struggling to make sure that his records are clean, and then a doc comes in real fast, and his doc's like, "Oh, I need to get out of here. Let me just check your temperature." So his temperature, he said, the doctor tells him, "Oh, your temperature is 99.7, so you're perfectly okay. Just take some Tylenol, and then you'll be fine." And what really stands out is that I know that doctors have big demands on their time. They're busy people, but essentially the question comes up is whether or not the color of your skin, your ethnicity, something that is your phenotypic appearance, something that weighs in as a causative factor for poorer outcomes in medical treatment. And what he experienced was that the doctor basically left, told him to get Tylenol, and he never saw the doctor again. Which, I mean, for someone that's running high fever, maybe it's not a big deal for adults. But personally, in my experience, um, I would just wish that someone's experience with healthcare could be a little better. Maybe I'll get more jaded as I get farther and farther into medicine, but I really hope that I can just like maintain that sense of naivety and take it with me, so we can enact some change in a system that is just like, yeah, it's flawed. It's flawed. It's not like terribly flawed. It's just it's got problems that need to be rectified. Yeah. So anyways, so he gets discharged from the hospital, and he talks to an African American secretary that's working, and she says that she tells his wife that this happens all the time, that doctors are brusque with the patients, especially African American patients, and that like all these mix-ups happen, but it just tends to happen more to minority groups. She said, if you're a Latino or Latina, essentially you would see like a lot lower standard of healthcare service. And what that stood out to me because yes, one is anecdotal, but as I came to read these other articles, and these are by USC and Harvard, so Harvard talking about racism and discrimination in healthcare. Essentially, they established that yes, there are different outcomes in healthcare, and yes, racism could lead to possible death or lower standards of treatment for patients. And that stands out, that's profound to me because we don't think of our healthcare providers as people that discriminate actively, But we're still all part of a system. The system has an institutional discrimination. It's like they looked at the body languages of different physicians, and they noticed that even though the physician said the same thing, they gave them the same diagnosis across different control groups and experimental groups. They realized that their body language, they didn't touch the patient as much if they were a minority. They tended to look more at screens if they were a minority. It was just like all these things keying into the fact that, our minds exercise just these stereotypes on a day-to-day basis, and that's normal in how we try to function, but it also expresses itself implicitly in the decisions and the actions that we take towards other people.